Alright, I'm going to do a front wheel bearing hub on my 01 Dodge Durango here. It's going to be very similar, if not the same, for a 1998 through a 2003. Regardless of the engine, there are going to be slight differences in hub design and such, whether or not you have a two-wheel drive V6 model, four-wheel drive model, etc., etc., ABS or not. Make sure you get the right hub. So an ABS hub compared to a non-ABS, ABS is going to have wiring, non-ABS is not. But it's going to be the same basic procedure, 98 through 03, regardless of which trim you have. I need to drop this back down here, loosen my lug nuts, get it lifted back up and back on some jack stands here, and then take the wheel off. Alright, so the wheel's off. You're going to want to spray this. There's going to be 3 or 4 bolts. Right there's one. Right there's another, and there's another one on the other side. You can see how incredibly rusty that is. So you're going to want to hit it with PB Blaster or some sort of penetrating whatever to help loosen that rust. Let it soak. Shit, good 15-20 minutes. Hit it a couple times during that time to try and make sure that we don't round off those bolts trying to get them out, because those are very rusty. Alright, while that's soaking, you're going to need to take your caliper off to get your rotor off, and we're going to have to remove this axle nut or what have you so that we can pull the hub out. So I need to unbolt the caliper, which I believe on these has got, yeah, this weird shit instead of a typical bolt. I can't really get in there and show you, but it is like a Allen wrench head in there. So I'm not sure on the size, but I gotta find the right bit to put on a ratchet that fits into that, and I'll show you when I get it. Okay, so the proper thing to use for this is a bit like this, you know, hexagon or whatever it's called. It's like an Allen key. I don't have the right size. So I've done this before because I've forgotten to pick up more of these in the right size. I think these are called Torx bits, I'm not sure, but this thing, a 45, at least on my caliper, I have a 4-wheel drive with the 4.7. The 45 fits that absolutely perfect. And these aren't too tight because they are greased up. So I've done this before and it's worked just fine. As long as it's a perfect fit, which this one is, there's like zero play. So I'm going to improvise and use one of these, but you should be using the correct size of one of these. Alright, so a little tip for these types of caliper bolts, instead of, you know, your traditional bolt, if you have these kind, a lot of times what they'll do is once you have them backed out all the way, whether you're using a power tool or even just a regular ratchet, they'll sit there and continue to spin. Like that. So they're actually at the end of the threads. And what you want to do when you reach the end and it keeps spinning like that, just pull back lightly on your tool or your ratchet as you turn it to get it to back out far enough to clear the threads so that you can get it off. Otherwise, you might be hanging up on just the last millimeter of the bolt trying to get this caliper off. So just pull back at the same time. And see, it'll come out like that. It's a lot easier with a tool, but you can still manage the same thing with a ratchet. Okay, then these will slide out. It'll just look like that. One on top, one on bottom, and those are your mounting bolts for the caliper. The caliper should be free at this time. On this vehicle, you have this tension arm right here, or whatever you would want to call it, that as you try to pull it off, it's going to stop you right here. So you need to either pop the thing out completely or just try to pull these arms off over the side so that you can remove your caliper. Okay, just pry it from the top there with a screwdriver. Be careful because that is under tension and it could come shooting out at you. The nightmare part is getting this thing back in. So my caliper should be free now. It's free, I just can't do it one-handed. See, it's coming off. So you can pry your caliper off your rotor there. Alright, you want to be careful not to bend this brake hose, brake line, the metal part. when you take this off, so you don't want to leave it hanging there. You can damage your brake line. Have something that's supported on like this. So now the caliper should come off. It might be a little stuck. Mine's not. If it is, just tap around on it with a rubber mallet. It'll come right off. If your hands are nasty and greasy, you really don't want to touch the rotor. You don't want to get any of that on there. If you do, you want to use brake parts cleaner to clean it back up. Okay, so this is your hub. Wheel bearings are within. Bolts on the back hold it. We need to take this cotter pin out. You'll just unbend it so it's straight as possible, and then you can tap it out and pull it out through the other side. Get this stupid little cap thing off of here, which will reveal the axle nut. Shit. There we go. Okay, there's the axle nut I gotta get off. Let's see what size that is. Go ahead and spray this thing too. I've seen those threads are a little rusty, and it'll just help guarantee you we can get it off of there. Actually, it's been a few minutes. I'm gonna go back and hit the bolts on the back again. Okay, on mine, that is a 32 millimeter. Like I said, it might be different whether you have 4-wheel drive or 2-wheel drive, ABS, non-ABS. You're gonna want a really, really long breaker bar. If you don't have one that long, then you just put something on the end of it to make it longer to give you the leverage to break this thing free. It's going to be on there pretty damn tight. You might even have to stick it out that way and jump on it. Be careful. And it's also highly advisable that you use a 3/4 inch drive, or sorry, 1/2 inch drive instead of your standard 3/8, because you're probably going to break anything 3/8 unless you got a really strong 3/8 breaker bar. It might work, but to use 1/2 inch drive is highly advisable, which is what I'm using. Or power tools, but you're going to have some beast ass shit to get that off. This thing's pretty damn strong and it's not even budging. Breaker bar. Anyways, you gotta wedge something in there. I think I'm just gonna go like this with an extension. Be careful, that could pop out on you as you put force on it. I had it in there pretty good, but you're gonna have to stop that from turning. That should work right there. Long ass extension, or you're gonna have to chain it up to that. Or do that apparently. That's fucking great. Alright, that is freaking ridiculous. I even tried my pickle fork here, and it bent that. Look at that. And those things are really strong. Fuck. Alright, big ass logging chain. I got it hooked there and weaved in through the studs there. So this may not end up being the final orientation of how I have this chain on here to get this off. But I'm going to give this a try. First orientation failed, it slipped. Now I got it hooked into itself over there. Let's see if this works. Snug so far. I can't get enough weight on it. I got to put something on this. Okay, that's really, really tight. I'm putting a pipe on there to give myself some more leverage. I don't know if that's going to be enough. Alright, so I stood on that and heard some cracking noises coming from the head of my ratchet there. Again, you're supposed to be using a breaker bar. I'm going to have to run out and get one or something. Oh my God. Did that go? It's still tight as shit. Oh. Alright. That is insane. Okay, so your axle here is in the way. You're going to have to use either a short extension with a pivot head like this, so you can pivot it off the side slightly and get your ratchet on here, because when you try to put your ratchet on the socket, you hit your axle. If you had the right length, you might be able to get your ratchet out here. Either way, you're gonna need a swivel joint or something, or some the right extensions or lengths of sockets and shit, so you can get a ratchet on it and get that off. You don't want that crooked because these are gonna be really tight. These are also so very tight. You're gonna need a really big ratchet. This is my 1/2-inch drive with my adapter to go down to 3/8, or a breaker bar if you can get it in there or something, but there's not much room, so really it needs to be a big ratchet or a long 3/8 ratchet or something. These are tight. By the way, as you can see, well, if I get the shadow off of me here, right there, is the tip of these bolts. I've done this before, I don't know why I didn't think of it this time, but spray the tips of these two, they stick out a little, because they'll also be seized up there, make it a lot easier removing them. Alright, there's the 3 bolts. On mine it's a 9/16 head. So this triangular looking thing here is the back of the hub. It's going to separate from the spindle and the whole thing will come out. It's going to be pretty tight. Try beating around on it with a hammer some, loosen it up. But ultimately, you're probably going to need to attach something to this, like a slide hammer, and yank it out of here. But let's see if I can get it just by smacking around on it. And obviously, you only want to do this if you know you're replacing it, because it's going to bang it up. But yeah, that's pretty seized in there. Unless I can get a gap in there and a crowbar and try to start prying it out, I'm going to have to attach my slide hammer to this somehow and yank it out. Don't forget your little washer that was in there too, under the axle nut. And as you can see, or not see, because of the shadow, the axle's completely free. I'm pushing it in and out. I just gotta yank this thing off of here. Also, I'm working at chipping away this rust here and on the seam. And I'm going to spray my PB blaster around the seam after I've chipped as much of this loose rust off as possible. Hopefully that'll penetrate that and help me get it off. It's just seized on there from all the rust. Okay, now you can see the fucking gap. They're breaking off several screwdrivers in there. Beating on it with the back of this. Finally getting it to come out. So there's your hub. You want to clean all that out real good. I'm going to grease it up before we put the new one back in. And I guess, don't think I have ABS because there's no wire. So if you had ABS, you would just have to unclip the wire and the new one will come with a wire already, and just reroute and plug in the wire. Okay, so here's our new hub. Like I said, if you have ABS, there'll be a wire. You just want to clean this shit up now where your hub's going to sit. Take a wire brush to that, try to clean all the rust out that you can. And then I'm going to grease it up to prevent any moisture from building up in there like that and letting it continue to rust. And it also helps seal the back side of your hub here. Create a barrier so that moisture can't get in there. So this axle's seen better days too. You can actually see there's a hole through it here. This little cup basically blocks off the back side to try and prevent it or create a seal, and it's got some play and shit around the edges. So, you know, really the axle should be replaced too, but I'm not worrying about that right now. I'm just going to pack this up full of grease real good. I'm going to fill this cup with grease, and then this inside area here I'm going to fill up with grease. I've already wiped it out with a rag and brushed it, so I'm just going to put plenty of grease in here. Just some multi-purpose grease like this should work. Just going to grease everything up real nice. Cover everything real well. Okay, something like that. And you're gonna have, you know, some squirt out when you shove it in there, but I'd rather have too much than not enough. So I'm gonna set my new bearing in here and work on getting it tightened down. You gotta align the splines on the axle in your hub there and get it lined up, and then stick it back on there. We got the torque specs. Alright, got the new hub on. These 3 bolts, they're 123 foot-pounds of torque is how tight you want to tighten them. Just go over them a couple times because this can teeter back and forth as it goes on. Make sure you put your washer back on. And then your axle nut. It's only a slight difference between the years and 4-wheel drive or 2-wheel drive. It's only like 5 foot-pounds of difference. It doesn't really matter. So on a 4-wheel drive, it's 180 foot-pounds. I think some of the older ones it's like 175. On a 2-wheel drive, it's 185 for some reason. So just call it 180 foot-pounds and be done. It's going to be really tight, by the way. 180 foot-pounds is your torque spec on this. Alright, I got my hub torque down, 180 foot-pounds. I'm throw this stupid thing on there. That stupid thing on there. That notch is going to have to line up for your cotter pin. You can reuse them if you got new ones. Replace it, or if it's really messed up, replace it, but this one should be fine. Get it back through there and then just bend it back out. Shit. Alright, now I need to get my caliper back on, get these pads situated back where they should be. You might be able to slide it back over with a little bit of wiggling and force. If you can't get it, you can get a C-clamp and push this piston back in just a few millimeters, just enough to get it to clear. Alright, I got it slid back on there. I didn't have to push the piston in or anything, so you're going to have to line these up. The pad's notch here, same down here, and then we got to put that little stupid tang thing back on here. Okay, that's fully installed. Just push against your rotor here, make sure it's flush, and then a few taps of the hammer around on it and it'll work its way on. Get my bolts back in there. So these things, you really want to clean them up, get all this gunk off, and put some grease on here, which I'm going to do, and then reinstall them. That'll keep them from seizing up, and it'll also make them work the way they're supposed to. They're supposed to be nice and greased up, and these ones are pretty dry and nasty. So I'm going to put some grease on them and get them in there. Okay, so I couldn't find a torque spec on those in a decent amount of time. I'm running out of daylight here. I'm trying to get it finished, but anywhere about 30 foot-pounds, 25, 30 foot-pounds should be fine for these. You don't want to over-tighten them. Okay, I just got to throw my wheel back on and we're done. You want to make sure that you torque your wheel properly. And if you did have to push the piston in any to get your caliper back on, start it and just push the brake pedal lightly a few times until it firms back up, because your pad's not going to be touching the rotor, so you're going to have to push it a few times to get that piston back out to where it needs to be. You never want to torque one next to the other. You want to crisscross it. It's best to do it in 3 steps. Torque spec on this is 110 foot-pounds. 90 or 100 is going to be just fine, and actually every time I got to take the lug nuts off of this thing, it is a nightmare. They never want to come off. They're real tight, so I'd recommend 90 or 100. Do it in 3 steps if you can. 30 foot-pounds, 60 foot-pounds, 90 foot-pounds. That keeps the wheel, if it teeters as it goes on, doing it in the 3 steps will make sure it goes on completely flush. You're supposed to clean up any crap on here so it'll go on flush, but as you can see, mine's pretty clean. And the purpose of doing that is so that you don't get the warped rotor symptom, because if your wheel doesn't go on perfectly flush, then it causes your rotor to wobble microscopically, which is how you get the warped rotor symptom, where your pedal pulses.